I actually do believe there's one right path. The one right path is whatever you fucking want your path to be. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our shadow, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And that's a poem by Marianne Williamson. Before I received my very spiritual, mystical call to be a chaplain, it never would have crossed my fucking mind. I am the unlikeliest chaplain, the unlikeliest reverend, the unlikeliest seminarian. I had been raised in a strict system that was so oppressive for me as a child that the idea that I would then become someone who used these words meant something different. They meant... if I was a chaplain, it would mean I was coercive. If I was a reverend, it would mean that I was somebody who believed there's one right path. So when I got my call to be a chaplain, I was sitting at a funeral I had helped to orchestrate, supporting an old dear friend's process with her mom dying. And I made a little joke to myself as I was sitting beside a chaplain that maybe I was a chaplain's wife. And I heard a voice say, "No, you're the chaplain." And everything started to kind of crumble, unfold, and open all at once after I heard that. After I said yes to that. A chaplain is whatever you need them to be. That's actually really important. Coming in with a compassionate presence and saying, what do you believe in? How can I support you? Finding out how someone has made meaning in their life and what really matters to them. I might be the last person to hear someone's story. Being witnessed can be so powerful. One way to describe what chaplains do is to first dispel the myth that a chaplain's job is to come in with what I like to call a one-path model religiously and help bring the person we're serving to a certain path or belief. But it's become the standard of care that chaplains actually are trained to come in and ask someone how they best believe and then support them in those beliefs however we can. What my daily reality looks like is that I start from home, kind of getting to know people's charts and setting up appointments, and then I drive to their homes and their facilities. So I'll be in retirement facilities or assisted living facilities or in someone's home. And I drive there, and then I go and I see them, and I listen to them, and I support them where they're at that day. Some people are really close to end of life, and they're not in any way verbal. And I might just go sit with them and pray, or I might just visit with their family member at their bedside. I'll oftentimes take the hand of the person who's not awake, or put my hand on their shoulder really gently and introduce myself, even if I sit with the family and talk about them. And then I listen and support and ask questions, and sometimes bring in religious objects or religious readings or prayers. Most of my work is listening. And then I say thank you, and I chart, and I sit in my car usually charting, and then I drive to the next visit. Being a chaplain is about being present with someone exactly where they are at. And in doing that, there's infinite potential for them to have all their needs met. If I am living in the truth of what I feel is the heart of chaplaincy, if I am truly being present with someone where they are at, I put aside what I think is needed and I listen with another kind of listening to what they might truly need. My ego, my curiosity for facts and details isn't what it's about. And that intuition, or that kind of like spiritual knowing, that connection I'm having from them, then informs the way I ask them questions, and it informs the way that we explore together what would best support them. As a supporter of families, what I often end up doing is calling them if they're not there with their loved one. So if it's a facility or a assisted living home where the person's family comes and goes, after I visit them, I call the family and I tell the family what I saw. And then I actually support the family however they need support, because really I'm there for the whole system. And the beloved might have Alzheimer's and not even know who I was or why I was there. They might receive an intrinsic gift. My patient might receive an intrinsic gift of my presence, but the family member might need a half an hour phone call of what's going on for them around the decline of their loved one. So that's a very important part of it. And what I found is as I build rapport with the family, then as the loved one gets closer to dying, the family member is more likely to reach back out to me and invite me in to that sacred space of the dying with the person, because we've built rapport, and in that way, the whole system of the family is supported. I want to be clear that family is not just blood family. Family is whoever that person's chosen family is too. And so I don't just limit it to someone's birth family on a chart. If they're well supported by a best friend, then that's who I'm supporting. My experience with being a death doula is that I'm really attuned to the space and the ritual around someone's actual dying process. What that means for me is that as I've studied different ways to support people when they're actually in the dying process, and understood the nuances about whether they need a room that has less people in it, or whether they need the lights a little lower, like what helps people to have a positive dying experience, then I'm attuned to that when I walk into spaces that I see people who are dying. Because I'm a hospice chaplain and I have a very large caseload for myself, and because there's a whole team approach, I might not be there during time of death. In fact, many of us might not, and someone might choose to hire a death doula separately. When I do get called to a death, the first thing I do when I come in is I remember what I know about the person and how I've gotten to know their values. And then I offer little tips and tricks for the family, like, oh, I wonder if she would like the window open a little bit. I know she loves hearing the birds. Or did she ever tell you about what she would want? Would she want any soft music playing? Or how can we set a stage for her that supports her? Or reminding people that it's okay to touch their loved ones if their loved one loves touch. Also reminding people that if their loved one was somebody who felt overwhelmed by touch, that it's actually, how can we best support that this person not receive a lot of touch? My point is that the nuance to the needs of the person when they're dying can really help them have a better death experience. And obviously we don't get a lot of feedback about that per se from the person who died, although some of us do hear back from them. You know, hospice as an approach is a mind, body, spirit support for people who are nearing end of life and their families. A lot of times people think of hospice as a hospice house or like a hospice home, like a retirement facility. Hospice is mostly not a place, it's a concept. The belief that is erroneous about hospice is that when you go onto hospice, you will die almost immediately. And that makes it so that people are reticent to actually go into hospice when it could be most beneficial, which may be a year and a half before they actually die. Technically, as long as a doctor can look at somebody's condition and say, you have 6 months to live as far as I can reasonably tell, then the person can go into hospice. And hospice is included in everybody's benefit, even if they have insurance or no insurance, just living in this country as a citizen, I'm sure. And it means you immediately have the support of a chaplain, social worker, nurse, and a hospice aide, and that's just a given for you. Because of that, if you go into hospice sooner than when grandpa is in his literal last 3 days of life and you finally decide to give up and go on hospice, and those words get used a lot, and then he dies 3 days later, then everyone says, well, hospice is a thing that you do that immediately means death. When the truth is that people live longer when they're on hospice. Because when you go into hospice and you start having this care and you're no longer going to the doctor 3 times a week, and you've stopped doing all these treatments that are limiting your quality of life, and you have your family gets to be your family more because they don't actually have to be all of the hospice team's roles and your family. In working with hospice specifically, we work in what we call an interdisciplinary team. And generally that means that each patient has a primary chaplain, a primary nurse, social worker, and hospice aide or CNA. We all work together to support the person, mind, body, and spirit. And the hospice philosophy truly believes that each person needs to have all of those needs addressed and cared for in their end-of-life process. That to leave out the psychosocial, to leave out the spiritual, to leave out the help with personal care needs, or obviously to leave out the nurse who does the medical piece and helps with medications to support someone to not be in pain or have shortness of breath. All together, we make holistic end-of-life care, and without one of those, something wouldn't be addressed. It's a way to address the whole person in this process. To be a woman chaplain, even 30 years ago, I couldn't have. As a woman and a minister, I mean, it's just immediately radical just to be an ordained woman minister. And I don't take it lightly, the hard work that women have done over time to be ordained as ministers. And it's huge. How it informs my work, though, is that I've come into this, much like I find that being an older queer person, sometimes I see these younger queer folk who are just like, I don't identify as queer because I don't have to. And one part of me is like, it's so important to identify. And some part of me is like, isn't this the world I hope to create, where you can feel free to not have to be identifying with anything, and you're feeling safe enough that you don't have to only surround yourself with people who also identify that way. And what a beautiful world if we don't have to limit ourselves to certain people because we've created safety. There's something there that's beautiful. Similar, though, I think I'm the woman minister that is the thorn in the side maybe of older women ministers who paved the path for me, because I, to a certain extent, have complete privilege just to be like, yep, I went to seminary for 3 years. I found an interfaith community that ordains people. I was ordained. And here I am doing whatever the fuck I want and calling myself a minister. Where a lot of them had to fight really hard to have that job. There's an entire world of conservatism that still doesn't ordain women or consider them to be ministers. Let me be clear. I am in a progressive world that I'm ordained as a woman. I was trained specifically as an interfaith chaplain in an interfaith setting, so we didn't actually focus on one religion. We focused on the spirit of chaplaincy, and then every month we put all of our energy learning different traditions. And many of us are trained in one way or another in some pieces of different world religions and indigenous paths as well, enough that we can at least have a sense of some language that we can support the person that we're working with. The places that call me the most are progressive Christianity, Sufism, earth-based traditions, 12-step. And that's kind of the combination for me. That's what but Buddhism is all in it, because I came into such Buddhism in my 20s. Being present with everyone exactly where they're at is more Buddhist than it is Christianity or Sufism or even earth-based traditions. But I couldn't I don't claim Buddhism much because now that I've been around a lot of fundamentalist Buddhists, I'm like, well, I definitely do not understand Buddhism like you do. As one who identifies as multi-path, I think I've found as I've studied the great teachers more and more, whether it be Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and then all the other really amazing teachers that aren't like the one that was named as the leader of a religion. I think that Rumi, the poet Rumi, is a great example of like, while he was the kind of the beginning of Sufism, he's not often named as a tried and true religious leader like Jesus or Buddha or Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There's so many truths that are shared between so many paths that I don't believe in watering down any person's path, but I have found for myself that several paths are true for me. And I also really honor that some people have one that they truly believe is the truth for them. It's when they use it to justify oppressing others, hurting others, destroying others, killing others, that I can't support it. Grief is huge. Grief is something that is happening to all of us all the time in some degree. Once again, grief is something that we don't recognize oftentimes. There's a grief process when you move to a new house and you really loved your old house. There's a grief process that happens when you go through a major relationship shift, even if it means you're going into marriage from being only dating. Sometimes there's grief from being from where you were to where you go. The transitions in our life cause grief. It's not just when your family member dies. It's also not just when your pet dies. It's when life changes and there's a part of you that is still back where things were before, that doesn't quite want to come along with you yet. Our grieving processes are not tidy things, and I think because of that, it doesn't fit into capitalism very well. You can't actually quantify grief. And sometimes people try to. They say normal grieving is about 6 months, and then you should be back to normal. And I say grief is as varied and nuanced and significant as our fingerprints. You cannot compare one person's grief to another. For some of us, grief is tears and big feelings. For some people, it's going right back to work because they can't even begin to feel those feelings yet. And then 6 months later, they're on a walk and suddenly grief hits them as if out of nowhere. And not only do they quit their job the next day, but they go on to a different career the next year. For some people, grief is tiny little pieces day to day of remembering someone and having a little tear or a little laugh that reminds them of how much they love that person and they're grieving. And for some people, it comes all at once like a flood, and then it might actually be gone. They might be forever changed, and grief might not have gone anywhere, but it actually shaped them, and then they moved forward with it. Grief doesn't generally end, I don't think. I think it becomes part of the new normal. For many of us, we're still grieving the losses we had 20 years ago. It's just that now we've integrated that grief into a new life. And if we were a people who could accept that grief is a natural part of being a human, and that death is a natural part of being a human, and that we are all on a path of grieving in one way or another, I feel like we'd be able to move that. And as we moved that, we'd be able to be more alive. This poem is by Mary Oliver. It's called The Messenger. My work is loving the world. There the sunflowers, here the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The Phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing since all ingredients are here, which is gratitude to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren and the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever. One of my things that I've been saying lately is, my patients keep dying. Is it something I did?